I still remember the first time I saw them run. Not retreat run. There's a difference, and any soldier worth their rations knows it. A retreat is tactical, orderly, a redistribution of forces. Running is what happens when something breaks inside, when the lizard brain takes over, and all the bravado and mutation and demonic pacts mean nothing against pure, animal terror. That was on Varadon III, in the ash wastes where the sky never cleared, and the ground crunched with bone meal from wars fought before my grandfather was born. We were 4th Company, Corps of a 217th, and we'd been holding a trench network for 6 weeks against a warband that called themselves the Flayed Sons. They wore strips of human skin stitched into their armor, and they laughed when they killed. They laughed less. Toward the end. The smell hit me before I saw them coming. That's what I remember most clearly. Even now. Promethium mixed with something else. Something organic that shouldn't burn but does anyway. Like meat, left too long in the sun, then set alight. It was our smell, the guards' smell, and I didn't understand it then. I was young. 23 standard years, 5 campaigns. Thought I'd seen enough to call myself a veteran. I knew how to field strip my las rifle in the dark, how to sleep standing up in a trench, how to tell from a scream whether it was human or something that used to be. I knew the prayers, the drills, the chain of command. I knew how to hate the enemy. What I didn't know was why Colonel Verson kept walking the lines at night, stopping at random to stare at us like he was counting something. Not counting us, counting something inside us. The Flayed Sons hit us at dawn on the 43rd day. They always attacked at dawn, because they thought it was poetic or meaningful, or whatever passes for philosophy among the damned. Hundreds of them, screaming those screams that aren't quite words, firing bolters that coughed shells the size of your fist. We fired back. That's what you do. You fire back until your hands blister from the heat of your weapon, or until something hits you hard enough to stop the firing. 3rd Squad to my right disappeared in a gout of pink flame that smelled like copper and flowers. 6th Squad's trench took a direct hit from something that screamed as it flew. The man next to me, Draven, took a bolt round through the shoulder, and the arm just came off, spinning away like it had somewhere else to be. He looked at the stump, looked at me, and said, "Oh," in this surprised little voice before he dropped. I kept firing. We all did. That's the thing about the Guard, we keep firing. Not because we're brave, not because we believe. We fire because if we stop, even for a second, we have to think about where we are and what's happening and how likely we are to see tomorrow. So we fire, and we reload, and we fire again, and the world shrinks down to this tiny bubble of las fire and prayer and the man beside you who's now just meat. The Flayed Sons reached the wire. That's when I heard the order come down the Vox, crackling with static and distance. Colonel Verson's voice, calm as if he was ordering breakfast. 4th Company, Protocol 7, Authorization Omega Black, Emperor, preserve us. Every officer in our trenches went still. I saw Lieutenant Harkin's face go white under the ash and blood. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Then he keyed his own Vox and started giving orders in this tight, careful voice, like he was afraid the words would cut him if he said them wrong. The veterans, the old hands who'd served longer than I'd been alive, they just nodded and started moving with this awful purposefulness. I didn't understand. Not then. The Flayed Sons were at the wire, some of them through it already, close enough to see the runes carved into their armor, close enough to smell them rot and incense and hot metal. Fix bayonets, Harkin said. Not shouted. Said. Quiet enough. I almost missed it under the bolter fire. We fixed bayonets. That smell got stronger. The burning promethium smell, but underneath it something else, something that made my stomach twist. I looked down the line and saw Corporal Thrace staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else. Saw Private Kellen's lips moving in what might have been prayer, or might have been something older. Saw Sergeant Marak's eyes, and they were empty, like someone had reached in and scooped out everything that made her human and left just the functioning parts. "First rank," Harkin said, still quiet. "Forward." We went forward, not charged, went. One step, then another, in perfect drill formation like we were on the parade ground back in basic. The flayed sons saw us coming and they laughed, because they thought we were mad or desperate, or both. 20 meters, 15, 10, they raised their weapons. We didn't speed up, didn't slow down, just walked. That smell was choking now, thick enough to taste, and I realized with this distant, dreamy horror that it was coming from us, from our skin, our breath, our very presence. The air around us shimmered like heat haze. 5 meters. That's when I saw the first one falter. A Chaos Marine who must have stood 3 meters tall in his corrupted armor, covered in mouths that whispered obscenities, and he just stopped. His head tilted. Then he took a step back. Then another. The laughter from the Warband got quieter, confused. We were still walking. The veterans had started humming something, tuneless and droning, and I found my own throat making the sound without deciding to. It wasn't a prayer. It was older than prayer. It was the sound of something that's forgotten how to die but keeps walking anyway. 3 meters. The flayed sons broke. Not all at once. One backed up, then 2, then a dozen, then all of them, scrambling over the wire they'd just breached, firing wildly behind them, and their screams had changed quality. They weren't the confident roars of corrupted killers anymore. They were animal sounds, prey sounds. We followed them, not running, still walking, that terrible methodical pace, and now I could see what they saw. I caught my reflection in a piece of broken metal, and my face looked wrong, stretched, like something was pushing out from underneath. My hands didn't hurt anymore, even though I knew they should, knew the blisters had burst hours ago. Nothing hurt. I was still humming. The flayed sons ran for 3 kilometers before they stopped running and started begging. We walked the whole way. When we caught them, we didn't stop walking. I don't like to think about what we did in that ash waste, in the grey morning light. I don't like to think about how efficiently we did it, how thoroughly, or how the ones who'd been laughing 6 hours earlier were sobbing and calling for mercy from the dark gods who'd abandoned them. I don't like to think about how we didn't speak, didn't acknowledge each other, just worked in this perfect silent coordination like we were parts of a machine, or how I was humming the whole time, and so was everyone else, and the sound of it rolled across the wastes like a tide. When it was done, we walked back to our lines. The smell faded. Sensation returned. Harkin vomited into his helmet. Thrace sat down in a shell crater and stared at nothing for 8 hours. I looked at my hands and they were my hands again, but I couldn't shake the memory of how they'd looked before, how they'd felt. Strong, wrong, like they'd belonged to something else that had borrowed my skin for an afternoon. Colonel Verson was waiting when we got back. He looked at us with those counting eyes and nodded once, satisfied. "Good work, 4th Company," he said. "The Emperor provides." That was 3 years ago. Since then, I've seen Protocol 7 implemented 17 more times across a dozen worlds. I've learned what that smell is, what it means. I've learned why the veterans go quiet when the order comes down. I've learned what happens to a human being when you strip away everything that makes them question, everything that makes them hesitate, everything that makes them anything, except an instrument of the Emperor's will. I've learned that there are things you can do to the human psyche, with the right conditioning, the right chemicals, the right prayers murmured over sleeping men for weeks on end, that turn a soldier into something else, something that doesn't stop, something that doesn't doubt, something that doesn't care about its own survival because on some fundamental level it's forgotten that survival is supposed to matter. The Chaos Warbands have a name for guard regiments that use Protocol 7. They call us the Hollow Men. They say we're worse than blanks, worse than the Sisters of Silence, because at least those are born wrong. We chose it, or had it chosen for us, which amounts to the same thing. They say that fighting us is like fighting the walking dead, except the dead have more mercy. They say we smell like the end of everything, like the heat death of the universe given form. They say that even the plague marines, who've dedicated themselves to decay and entropy, find us disturbing. I don't know if that's all true. I know they run when they smell us coming. I know the veteran warbands, the ones who've fought for 10,000 years, they evacuate entire operational theaters when they confirm a Protocol 7 regiment is deploying. The thing you have to understand about the Imperial Guard is that we're not space marines. We don't have the conditioning, the hypnotherapy, the gene-forged superiority. We're just human, regular, baseline human. Soft, fragile. We die if you shoot us, bleed if you cut us, break if you hit us hard enough. Every other faction in the galaxy has some advantage: better technology, chaos, blessings, alien physiology, demonic immortality. We just have numbers. Numbers and the fact that we keep coming. But numbers alone don't make Chaos Space Marines run. Orcs don't run from numbers. Tyranids don't even comprehend the concept. So the Munitorum, in its infinite wisdom, found a way to turn our weakness into a weapon. They found a way to make our very humanity into something that could be weaponized. It starts in basic training. For certain regiments, the Korava 217th, the Meridian Firstborn, the Vanheim Penal Legions. Others. Not many, because the process is difficult and the failure rate is 40%. 40% of candidates wash out or die during training, which is considered acceptable losses by the Departamento Munitorum. The rest of us, we get the standard drill, the standard prayers, the standard brutalization that turns civilians into soldiers. But we also get something else. Injections that we're told are anti-disease inoculants, stim doses that we're told improve reaction time, hypno-castigations that we're told reinforce loyalty to the Emperor. All of that is true. It's also incomplete. The chemicals suppress the fear response, the pain response, the self-preservation instinct. Not completely, you can't function without some baseline survival drive, but they suppress them enough that when the order comes down, when Protocol 7 activates, we can bypass them entirely. The hypno-conditioning plants subliminal triggers, phrases that mean nothing until they're spoken by an authorized officer with the right command codes. Then they mean everything. They become the only thing. The Emperor protects. Advance and secure. Protocol 7. These words rewrite your brain architecture for approximately 4 hours, turning off parts of your mind that question or fear or feel, and turning on parts that shouldn't activate outside of the most extreme survival scenarios. Colonel Verson explained it to me once, in a moment of unusual candor. We were on a troop transport between deployments, sitting in the observation bay, watching the Warp Royal outside the Geller field. He'd been drinking, which was unusual for him. Officers of his rank rarely show weakness, and drinking is weakness in the Guard. But he looked old that day, older than his 60 years, and when he spoke his voice had this distant quality like he was reading from a report. "Do you know what the human brain does when it's dying?" he asked me. I didn't answer because it wasn't really a question for me. It floods the system with neurochemicals, endorphins, adrenaline, others we don't have names for. Pain disappears, fear disappears, time dilates. You get superhuman strength, superhuman focus, because your body is burning everything it has in one last desperate bid to survive. People lift ground cars off their children, run on broken legs, fight off attackers 3 times their size. It's a beautiful thing, really. Beautiful and tragic, because it only happens once. You can't trigger that response voluntarily, because the brain knows it's lethal. It'll kill you as surely as the thing you're fighting, just slower. He took another drink. But the Mechanicus, they're clever. They found a way to trigger it voluntarily, to turn it on and off like a switch. Took them 3,000 years and 1 billion test subjects. But they did it. Protocol 7 is that switch. For 4 hours, give or take, you become what a human would be if we didn't have anything holding us back. No fear, no pain, no hesitation, just purpose, just the mission, just the enemy and what needs to be done to them. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and his eyes were empty. The Chaos Marines, they see us coming, and they see something they recognize. They see themselves. Before they fell, they see what they used to be, human, but human without limits, human without the weakness. Except we're worse, because we're still loyal, still faithful, still serving. They've spent 10,000 years trying to escape what they were, and here we come, reminding them. No wonder they run. I asked him what happened after the 4 hours. He smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. After? You come down. Hard. The body has to recover from burning itself that hot. Most soldiers sleep for 18 hours straight. Some develop tremors, hallucinations, psychological breaks. We lose about 5% per activation to permanent psychological damage, another 3% to physical complications, heart failure, brain hemorrhaging, metabolic collapse. But 82% survive and recover full functionality within 72 hours. That's considered an excellent success rate. We can activate Protocol 7 once per week per soldier, without the fatality rate climbing above acceptable parameters. That's 26 deployments per year per trooper. At 40,000 troopers per regiment, that's over 1 million man-hours of unstoppable killing force annually. He said it like he was reading from a technical manual. Maybe he was. Maybe that's what the colonels get, briefing documents that explain the weapon systems under their command, and we're just another weapon system. More complicated than a Lehman Russ, less reliable than a Basilisk, but cheaper to produce and easier to transport. I wanted to ask him if he'd known, when he signed up for the Guard 50 years ago, that this was what he'd become. I wanted to ask if he ever wondered what happened to the parts of us that Protocol 7 shut off, whether they came back fully, or whether we lost a little bit more of ourselves every time. I didn't ask. You don't question your colonel, especially not about things that might be heretical to question. So I just nodded and stared out at the warp, and tried not to think about the smell. The second time I experienced Protocol 7 was on a world whose name I never learned. We called it Grey Death, because everything was grey: the sky, the ground, the twisted metal ruins of whatever civilization used to exist there. We'd been fighting the Broken Chains Warband for 2 months, a grinding campaign through urban ruins where every building was a death trap, and every corner hid some fresh horror. The Broken Chains specialized in terror tactics, skinning prisoners alive, crucifying corpses along our supply routes, broadcasting screams on all Vox frequencies. They thought fear was their ally. They didn't understand that we'd been trained not to feel it. The order came down at 0400 hours. We deployed at 0430. 2 companies, 800 men and women, moving through the ruins in perfect silence. No Vox chatter, no nervous jokes, no prayers. Just the sound of boots on rubble, and that smell starting to build. That promethium and rot smell that meant the chemicals were activating. The conditioning was taking hold. I could feel it happening this time, now that I knew what to look for. It was like someone was reaching into my chest and turning a dial, adjusting the levels on what I was capable of feeling. Fear dial turned to 0, pain dial turned to 1, just enough to register damage but not enough to slow me down. Empathy dial turned off completely. Purpose dial turned to maximum. We found the Broken Chains forward base in an old Medicae facility. They'd fortified it, naturally. Heavy bolter nests, razor wire, mines, the works. They saw us coming and opened fire, and I watched 3rd Company get cut apart by the heavy bolters, watched bodies come apart in sprays of red, and I felt nothing. Not horror, not anger, not even satisfaction. Just acknowledgement. 3rd Company took the fire. 4th Company advanced. That's how it worked. I stepped over Corporal Thrace's body, the upper half of it, anyway, and kept walking. The smell was so strong now that I could see it. A grey shimmer in the air around us. And I understood in some distant, clinical way that we were releasing something, some pheromone or psychic signature that the human body only produces under the most extreme duress. We were walking corpses, already dead, but too stupid or stubborn to lie down, and that wrongness was visible, tangible. something that violated the basic laws of how the universe should work. The broken chains held for 10 minutes. Then they started screaming. Not the screams they'd been broadcasting, not the theatrical, orchestrated terror. These were raw, genuine, the sound of something fundamental breaking inside them. They stopped firing. They started climbing over each other to get away from us. We followed them inside the Medicae facility, through corridors slick with old blood and new fear, and we killed them in their panic, methodically, thoroughly, without waste motion or unnecessary cruelty, just pure efficient slaughter like we were clearing brush or purging vermin. I remember catching one by the arm as he tried to squeeze through a window, and his flesh came apart in my grip like wet paper. And I didn't feel strong so much as I felt like the universe had gotten softer, like reality itself was less solid around us. When it ended, when the last one stopped twitching and the silence settled like ash, I looked around at what we'd done and felt nothing. The bodies were everywhere, stacked in corners, sprawled across floors, hanging from doorways. 800 enemy dead, maybe more. 4th Company, lost 43. I could list every name, see every face, because I'd been there when they died and my brain was still running at that hyper-efficient pace that recorded everything, analyzed everything, forgot nothing. Draven again, his remaining arm torn off by a chain axe. Lieutenant Harkan bolt around through the helmet. Sergeant Marak, pulled apart by some demonic thing that we'd killed 3 seconds later. Their deaths were data points, tactical information, nothing more. Then the 4 hours ended. I came back to myself, sitting against a wall with Harkan's blood drying on my hands and a taste like copper and ashes in my mouth. The smell was fading, but I could still detect it, underlying everything, like it had soaked into my skin and wouldn't wash out. My body hurt. Not just hurt in ways I didn't know bodies could hurt, like every cell was screaming individually. My hands were shaking so hard I couldn't hold my lasrifle. I looked around and saw the rest of 4th Company in similar states, sitting, staring, shaking, some crying though they probably didn't realize it. Thrace's corpse was 10 meters away, and I remembered stepping over him like he was a piece of furniture, and I vomited until there was nothing left, and then I vomited again. Corporal Yellen found me there 3 hours later. She was one of the ones who hadn't been on the activation roster, part of the reserve force that stayed back to hold the perimeter. She had a canteen and a medical kit, and this look on her face that was part concern and part something else. Not quite fear. More like the careful wariness you'd use around a dangerous animal that might be tame or might not. She helped me drink, helped me bandage the wounds I hadn't noticed during the activation, a deep cut on my forearm, a burn across my shoulder, my left hand missing 2 fingernails though I couldn't remember how. We didn't talk. What would we say? The 3rd time was worse. The 4th time was worse than that. By the 6th time, I stopped counting. Protocol 7 became just another part of deployment routine, like equipment checks or prayer duty. The chemicals were in our system permanently now, the conditioning too deep to ever scrub out. We didn't need the weekly reinforcement anymore. The triggers were hardwired. Whenever the order came down, we'd shift, and we'd become what we needed to be. The time between activations got shorter. The recovery periods got longer. I started noticing things that stayed with me even after the protocol ended, a certain flatness to my emotional responses, a difficulty connecting with anything that wasn't immediately tactical, nightmares that I couldn't quite remember, but that left me shaking and cold. I wasn't alone. The whole regiment was developing these tics, these markers of chronic Protocol 7 use. We moved differently, talked differently, the light in our eyes was different. Or maybe there was less light, hard to say. The other regiments started avoiding us. Not obviously. You can't obviously avoid a sister regiment without it being noticed by the commissariat, but in the mess halls, at the refit stations, in the transit barges between deployments, there would always be this empty space around the Korava 217th. Word spreads, in the Guard, word about which regiments are lucky, which are cursed, which are too dangerous to stand next to. We were all 3, Lucky because we kept winning, kept surviving battles that should have annihilated us, cursed because of what we'd become, dangerous because everyone could smell it on us now. That faint trace of the protocol that never quite faded. We walked wrong. We smelled wrong. We were wrong in some fundamental way that even normal humans could sense, even if they couldn't articulate it. I found out later, much later, that the Korava 217th wasn't the first. There'd been earlier regiments, experimental units dating back to M38, when the Mechanicus first started exploring this particular application of combat doctrine. Most of them failed, turned feral, went rogue, had to be purged by their own side. The few that succeeded became templates for what would eventually become Protocol 7. The Meridian Firstborn were one of the earliest success stories, and they've been deploying continuously for 1200 years. 1200 years of Protocol 7 activations, of chemical conditioning, of killing, until the killing becomes the only thing that feels real. I met a veteran from the Firstborn once, an old sergeant with white hair and eyes like chips of ice. He'd been activated over 400 times. 400 times he'd become something else, something hollow, something that forgot how to be human. He didn't speak much, didn't need to. I understood him perfectly. The thing about Protocol 7 is that it's a bargain. The Imperium is full of bargains: your life for the Emperor's protection, your freedom for the Imperium's order, your soul for the machine god's blessing. Protocol 7 is another bargain: your humanity for victory, the ability to feel fear, pain, mercy, all those messy emotions that make us human, all those things that make us hesitate, in exchange for the capacity to become the perfect weapon. 4 hours at a time, purchased with your psychological integrity. The Munitorum calculated that each soldier could survive approximately 200 activations before permanent psychological collapse. 200 times you could pull the trigger and become someone else. After that, you'd be transferred to a penal legion or a servitor processing facility, or, if you were lucky, executed for heresy. 200 chances to win. 200 times to forget you're human. I'm at 147. The last major engagement was on Hatherris IV, against a warband calling themselves the Emperor's Lament. They were word-bearers originally, or claimed descent from them, and they'd spent 300 years perfecting their corruption, their blasphemies, their particular flavor of theological horror. They had daemons bound into their armor, prayers that could strip faith from the faithful, and a champion who'd personally killed 3 Space Marine chaplains in single combat. They thought themselves unstoppable. They thought the Guard was beneath their notice, just chaff to be burned away on the road to worthier opponents. Then Protocol 7 activated, and they learned differently. We hit them at their ritual site, an ancient temple they'd converted into a shrine to the Chaos gods. They were in the middle of some summoning, some grand invocation that would have turned the entire planet into a demon world if we'd given them another hour. We didn't give them another hour. We gave them nothing except steel and las fire and our own particular brand of horror. The smell rose thick enough to choke on, and I saw the demons they'd summoned recoil from it, saw the reality of the ritual space ripple and distort. We were anathema to them in a way that even Imperial faith wasn't, because faith implies belief, implies caring, implies that there's still something human doing the fighting. We'd gone beyond that. We were walking blasphemy, an insult to the very concept of consciousness, and the warp itself couldn't quite process what we'd become. The word-bearers fought. Credit where it's due. They fought hard, fought well, fought with 10,000 years of tactical experience and daemonic enhancement. They killed 100 of us in the first 5 minutes. It didn't matter. We kept coming. They killed another 100, still kept coming. They brought up their champion, a creature that stood 4 meters tall and radiated such concentrated malice that unenhanced humans died from being near it. We pulled it down through sheer weight of numbers, buried it under bodies until we could get a melter charge against its armor, and when it finally fell, it was screaming, not in rage or defiance but in something that sounded like fear. The warband broke at minute 19. They ran at minute 20. We pursued them for 6 hours across the planet's surface, hunting them down in ones and twos, in groups that tried to hide, or groups that tried to fight. I don't remember most of it. Just flashes a word-bearer on his knees, begging in a language I shouldn't have understood but did, promising us anything if we'd just stop, a daemon trying to possess one of us, and failing, burning away like morning frost, because there wasn't enough human left to possess. The champion's head, which we took as a trophy because protocol dictated we take it, carried it back to show the commissariat proof of kill. I remember my hands weren't shaking when I held it, weren't shaking at all. The come down from that activation took 2 days. 2 days of fever dreams and psychosomatic pain, my body trying to process what I'd put it through. I'd lost another 2 teeth, they just fell out during the activation, the body cannibalizing itself for resources. My hair was starting to gray at the temples despite being 26 standard years old. I couldn't remember my mother's face. I could remember every kill I'd made under Protocol 7, could recount them in perfect detail, could tell you the exact expression on their faces as they died, but I couldn't remember my mother's face. That seemed important somehow, though I couldn't articulate why. Colonel Verson visited me in the Medicae Bay. He looked older too. We all did. The regiment had started deployment at 40,000 strong. We were down to 32,000, and that wasn't just from combat losses. Suicide was becoming a problem, though the commissariat preferred the term failure to maintain combat readiness. Soldiers would just stop eating, or walk off into the wilderness of whatever planet we were on, or find creative ways to mishandle their weapons during cleaning. The psych evaluators tried to address it, tried to implement morale-building exercises and faith reinforcement. But you can't reinforce something that's been systematically burned away. The part of us that cared about surviving, that wanted to survive, had been turned into a toggle switch, and now we couldn't quite figure out how to turn it back on permanently. "They're offering us a commendation," Verson said. His voice was flat, administrative. "The Lord General himself wants to present it. Apparently, what we did on Hatherris IV is being studied as a tactical case study. Exemplar victory through applied psychology or some such." He paused. "They want to expand the program, roll out Protocol 7 to 12 more regiments, maybe more, if the expansion proves successful. The Munitorum thinks we've found something that could change the balance of power in the Great Crusade." I didn't respond. Couldn't think of anything to say that wouldn't sound like heresy or cowardice. Verson understood. He always understood. That's why he drank now, every night. Enough to forget, but not enough to affect his command capability. That's why his hands shook during briefings until he clasped them behind his back. That's why he looked at us with those counting eyes, always counting, always measuring how much of us was left. "I've been in the Guard for 48 years, he said, and now his voice had something in it, some emotion I couldn't identify because I'd forgotten how to identify emotions that weren't tactically relevant. "I've seen every kind of warfare the Imperium practices. I've seen Space Marines drop from orbit, and I've seen Titans level cities, and I've seen orbital bombardments turn continents into glass. This is worse. This is worse than all of it, because at least those other weapons know they're weapons. We've forgotten." He looked at me. "You've forgotten, haven't you? Forgotten what you were before. Before the conditioning. Before the chemicals. Before Protocol 7. I had. I tried to remember there must have been a childhood, a family, a life before the Guard, but it was all gone. Burned away or buried so deep it might as well be gone. I knew my name. I knew my rank and serial number. I knew the Imperial Creed, and the regimental litany, and 600 different ways to kill a man with whatever came to hand. That was enough. That was all that mattered. Wasn't it?" Verson left without saying anything else. I lay in the Medicae Bay and listened to the sounds of the ship around me, humming engines, distant prayers, the occasional scream from someone having a bad reaction to one thing or another. Outside the viewport, the stars looked different than I remembered, though I couldn't articulate how. Colder, maybe. More distant. like they'd moved further away, or I had, and now there was this gulf between me and the rest of the universe that nothing could bridge. We deployed 6 more times after Hatherris IV. 6 more activations. 6 more battles where Chaos Warbands ran when they smelled us coming. By the 5th deployment, we didn't even need the protocol order anymore. The conditioning had settled so deep that we'd enter the state spontaneously when combat commenced. The chemicals had built up to permanent concentrations in our systems. We'd become what we'd been pretending to be. And now there was no off switch, no coming back, just this endless grey existence where everything was tactical data and nothing hurt and nothing mattered except the mission. The last time I saw the regiment together, all of us who were left, maybe 24,000, at final count, was on a transport bound for somewhere the commissar didn't name. We sat in silence, row after row of hollow-eyed soldiers who'd forgotten how to be anything except weapons. Nobody spoke. Nobody made eye contact. We just sat, waiting for deployment, waiting for the order, waiting for the smell to rise and the world to narrow down to target and threat and the space between them. Some of the younger troopers, the replacements who'd joined after the protocol was already standard, they looked almost normal. Almost. You could still see it in the eyes, though. That emptiness, that absence of something fundamental. They'd never been anything except this, and they didn't know they were missing anything. That's when I understood what Colonel Verson had meant. That's when I understood why Chaos Warbands feared us. It wasn't because we were deadly, the galaxy is full of deadly things. It wasn't because we were relentless, the Imperium had relentlessness in abundance. It was because we'd achieved what Chaos promised but never delivered. We'd transcended our humanity without losing to Chaos. We'd become something beyond human without becoming daemons or mutants or madmen. We'd stayed loyal, stayed faithful, stayed true to the Imperium, even as we'd sacrificed everything that made us worth saving. We were the ultimate refutation of Chaos's central promise that transcendence requires corruption, that power requires damnation. We'd found a third way, an Imperial way, and it was so much worse than either alternative. The Chaos Space Marines, they'd chosen their damnation. They'd traded their souls for power, and they knew it. And on some level they could still remember what they'd been before, could still mourn the loss. They'd made a bargain, and they knew the price. We'd had the bargain made for us, had the price extracted without our understanding, and we couldn't even mourn because mourning required caring, and caring had been burned away. We were hollow in a way that Chaos couldn't comprehend, empty in a way that frightened them because it showed there were fates worse than damnation. You could lose your soul to Chaos and still be something. You could lose your soul to the Emperor and become nothing, just an empty vessel pouring out violence until the vessel cracked. They fear us because we're what happens when the Imperium stops pretending, when it stops caring about the individual soldier as anything except a resource to be optimized, when it takes the logic of the Munitorum, every soldier a bullet, every regiment a weapon, and pushes it to its inevitable conclusion. We're the truth of what the Imperium is underneath all the prayers and propaganda and Gothic architecture. We're the grinding, uncaring machinery of human extinction made manifest. We're the Imperial Guard without the humanity, and that's so much worse than Chaos because at least Chaos offers transformation into something. We offer transformation into nothing. I'm at 153 now. 47 to go before permanent psychological collapse, before they transfer me to some penal legion or servitor processing facility, or just put a bolt through my head. 47 more chances to pull the trigger, to become the hollow man, to forget again who I used to be. If I ever was, anyone at all. Sometimes, I'm not sure anymore. Sometimes I think maybe I've always been this, always been empty, and everything before was just a dream, a comfortable lie I told myself to get through the days. Sometimes, I can't remember if there were days before this, before the Guard, before Protocol 7. There must have been. Logically, there must have been. But logic and memory don't always align, especially not when your brain's been chemically and psychologically rebuilt 17 times over. The smell never quite goes away anymore. I can always detect it. Faint but present, like it's soaked into my cells and now it's just part of what I am. Other soldiers notice it too, give me that careful distance, that animal wariness. I don't blame them. I'd avoid me too, if I could. But you can't avoid yourself. Can't step outside your own skin no matter how wrong it feels or how much you want to. So I stay inside this shell that used to be a person, and I wait for the next deployment, the next activation, the next time the order comes down, and I get to forget that any of this should bother me. Colonel Verson ate his service pistol 3 weeks ago. They found him in his quarters, slumped over his desk with a half-written letter to someone, family maybe, or maybe just a note to himself, an explanation for why he couldn't do this anymore. The commissariat classified it as death by enemy action, because admitting a colonel committed suicide would be bad for morale, bad for the program. Can't let people think Protocol 7 has consequences, can't let the doubts creep in. We got a new colonel, younger, eager, enthusiastic about what we could accomplish. He'd read all the case studies, studied all the tactical analyses, and he couldn't quite hide how excited he was to have command of a Protocol 7 regiment. He looked at us like we were miracles instead of atrocities. Maybe we are. Maybe there's no difference. I think about running sometimes. Just walking away, deserting, finding some corner of the galaxy where the Imperium hasn't reached and trying to be human again. But I know I wouldn't make it. Even if I evaded the commissariat, evaded the Arbites, found some backwater world to hide on, I'd still have the smell, still have the emptiness, still have whatever Protocol 7 turned me into. You can't run from what you've become when what you've become is all that's left. And besides, the conditioning runs deep. The thought of desertion triggers immediate psychological distress, a cascade of negative reinforcement that makes my hands shake and my vision blur. Loyalty to the Emperor, loyalty to the Imperium, loyalty to the Guard, these aren't choices anymore. They're just facts, fundamental as gravity, and questioning them is like questioning whether you need to breathe. So I stay. I wait. I let them activate Protocol 7 again and again. Let them burn away whatever scraps of humanity remain. Let them turn me into exactly what the Imperium needs me to be. A weapon that walks and talks and maybe used to be human once, a long time ago, a hollow man. The kind that makes Chaos Warbands run. The kind that makes veteran traitors who fought for 10,000 years abandon their positions and flee in terror because they've seen every horror the galaxy can produce, but they've never seen someone give up everything, become nothing, and call it duty. That's why they fear us. Not because we're strong or brave or faithful. They fear us because we're proof that you can lose everything, your compassion, your fear, your very humanity, and still keep serving, still keep fighting, still keep killing with empty eyes and hollow hearts. They fear us because we're the end point of loyalty, the logical conclusion of devotion to the Emperor, and it's so much worse than anything chaos could produce. Chaos corrupts you into something, the Imperium perfects you into nothing. 47 activations to go. 47 more times I'll pull the trigger and become what they made me. 47 more battles where the enemy will smell us coming and start running, not because of what we are, but because of what we aren't, not because we're monsters, but because we're less than that. Empty vessels pouring out violence, hollow men wrapped in uniforms, the walking dead who haven't figured out they're dead yet. The Emperor protects, they say. Maybe he does. But sometimes I think he protects the Imperium from us as much as he protects us from the enemy. Sometimes I think we're the real horror story, the real threat, the real darkness at the heart of the Imperium. We're what happens when you take human beings and optimize them for killing, strip away everything except the capacity for violence and obedience, and call it holy. We're what happens when the machinery of war forgets that soldiers are human and starts treating them as ammunition. We're the face of the Imperium without its mask, and maybe that's why chaos runs. Maybe they see in us the future they're fighting against, the end state of the Imperium's vision, and it terrifies them more than any demon ever could. I don't know. I'm too far gone to know much of anything anymore, except how to follow orders, and how to kill, and how to become hollow when the trigger phrase sounds. Maybe that's enough. Maybe that's all anyone ever needs. The Emperor provides. After all, He provides victory. He provides purpose. He provides Protocol 7. And who am I to question his wisdom? I'm just a soldier, just a weapon, just a hollow man who forgot what it meant to be anything else. They're calling for muster now. New deployment, new world, new enemy to face. I can already smell the promethium, already feel the chemicals starting to activate in my bloodstream, already feel that familiar narrowing of consciousness, that shutting down of everything except tactical awareness and target acquisition. Soon I'll be gone again, replaced by whatever Protocol 7 makes me. And for 4 hours, I won't have to think about any of this. For 4 hours I'll be perfect, no doubts, no fear, no regret, no memory of what I've lost because you can't miss what you've forgotten. For 4 hours I'll be exactly what the Imperium needs. And afterward, if there is an afterward, I'll come back to this grey existence. This hollow shell. This thing that used to be human but isn't quite anymore. I'll sit in the Medicae bay and shake and remember every kill and forget everything else. And someone will eventually come and tell me how successful the mission was, how many enemies we defeated, how the Emperor is pleased with our service. And I'll nod and accept the commendation and wait for the next deployment. Because that's what hollow men do. We wait. We serve. We kill. We forget. And sometimes, in the rare moments, when the chemicals wear thin, and the conditioning loosens its grip, we remember just enough to understand what we've lost. And that's when it's worst. Because we remember but we can't care, can't feel, can't do anything except acknowledge the loss the way you'd acknowledge a tactical briefing or a weather report. 47 to go. Then maybe they'll let me rest. Or maybe they'll find I can go further, push past the 2 to 100 limit, prove that human consciousness can endure more than anyone thought possible. Maybe I'll be the one who shows them how far you can strip away before there's nothing left to strip. Maybe that's my purpose now, my contribution to the Imperium. To demonstrate the ultimate loyalty, the loyalty that persists even after everything that could be loyal has been burned away. The loyalty that's just a reflex, a programmed response, a ghost of devotion haunting a hollow shell. The Chaos Warbands will run again when they smell us coming. They always do. And somewhere, in the empty place where my humanity used to live, I'll understand why. Not because I've become something worse than them, though I have, but because I've become nothing at all, and nothing is always more frightening than something. Nothing is the end of everything, the absence of hope or purpose or meaning, and we've learned to weaponize it. We've learned to carry it with us, broadcast it like a signal, make it infectious, so that everyone who encounters us feels that same crushing nullity. We're the void given form, the heat death of the universe made flesh, the final silence that awaits all things. We're what comes after. And we serve the Emperor. That's the worst part, the part that makes chaos run fastest. We didn't choose this damnation. We didn't rebel, or fall, or corrupt. We stayed loyal, stayed faithful. And this is what loyalty gets you in the Imperium of man. This is the reward for service, for duty, for devotion. This is what happens to soldiers who give everything for the Emperor. We become hollow, empty, nothing. And we call it holy. We call it service. We call it the Emperor's will. And maybe it is. Maybe this is exactly what he wants, what he planned, what his great vision for humanity requires. Maybe we need hollow men to win his wars. Maybe you can't maintain an empire spanning 1,000,000 worlds without creating vessels this empty, this perfect, this devoid of anything except the capacity to kill. The formation is assembling. I take my place in the ranks, las rifle in hand, smelling that smell rising around us like morning fog. The new colonel is giving a speech about duty and faith and the Emperor's blessing. I'm not listening. None of us are. We already know everything he could tell us, know it in our bones, in our blood, in the chemical structures that have replaced our neural pathways. We know how to serve. We know how to kill. We know how to become nothing and call it everything. Protocol 7 activates in 3 minutes. 3 minutes until I forget this. Forget the emptiness, the loss, the knowledge of what I've become. 3 minutes until I'm perfect again, hollow again, nothing again. 3 minutes until I'm exactly what the Imperium needs me to be. The Chaos Warbands fear the Imperial Guard. Not all of us, just the ones like me. The ones who learned to let go of everything and keep walking. The ones who found the bottom of the abyss and discovered they could breathe down there. The ones who proved that humanity isn't required for service, that you can strip away every soft thing that makes us human and still have a functional weapon system. We're their nightmare because we're proof that loyalty doesn't require love, that devotion doesn't require faith, that service doesn't require humanity. We're proof that you can keep going long after there's nothing left to go with. And maybe that's the most horrifying thing in a horrifying galaxy. The order comes down, authorization codes spoken in the colonel's crisp voice. The chemicals surge, the conditioning activates, and I feel myself sliding away, replaced by something simpler, cleaner, more efficient. The smell intensifies. The world narrows. Purpose crystallizes into this pure, perfect thing. 46 to go, I think, in the last second, before thought becomes unnecessary. 46 more times. And then, maybe, I'll finally get to rest. Or maybe I'll just keep going, hollow and perfect, forever. Maybe that's what immortality looks like in the Imperium. Not eternal life, but eternal service, long after anything that could be called alive has departed. The Emperor protects, we advance. And somewhere on this nameless world, an enemy warband smells us coming and begins to run.